The summer air over Newport tastes of salt and secrets. Kayla Hart Thorne returns not as a guest, but as a paid companion, determined, composed, guarding the ache of a mother erased. Then the doors open, and the past walks in. Garrick Thorne, her estranged husband, with their 10-year-old son at his side. He offers a bargain, help soothe a trembling world of fortunes and facades, and see the child she once held. In the ballroom of whispers and watchful eyes, duty collides with desire, and a hidden wound demands its reckoning. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from. And one question: what do you love most about historical romances? The scandal, the longing, or the hard-won second chances? Newport, Rhode Island, summer of 1899. The sea air carried the salt of old wealth and older secrets, and the afternoon light fell in golden bars upon the manicured hedges of Ochre Point. It was the season of silk parasols and whispered alliances, of champagne under pergolas, and rumors passed like fans from gloved hand to gloved hand. Within this glittering theatre of privilege, Kayla Hart Thorne returned not as a guest, nor as a mistress of a grand estate, but as a paid companion to an heiress no longer in fashion. She descended from the modest carriage that had brought her from the station, her boots striking the gravel path with quiet, measured steps. Her figure was erect, her expression composed, her grey wool travelling dress severe but impeccably tailored. The hem, slightly dusty from the journey, brushed against the tops of her laced leather boots. A straw hat, practical and plain, shielded the contours of her face, but not enough to hide the maturity carved gently into her features. Soft olive skin, hazel eyes tempered by time, and the faint silver streak at her right temple that shimmered when the sun caught it just so. Kayla carried no jewelry. Her only adornment was a slender gold brooch at her collar, gifted to her long ago by a child whose laugh still haunted her dreams. In her reticule, she kept a handkerchief embroidered with the name James. She had not seen her son in over 4 years. The mansion where she would reside for the summer, Elmshade, rose before her like a forgotten cathedral of faded grandeur. The heiress she would serve, Miss Beatrice Pembroke, was said to suffer from feminine nerves and an aversion to sunlight. But Kayla was not here for society nor charity. She had chosen Newport for one reason alone. It was where Garrick Thorne summered with his new circle, and with James. Inside the house, the staff greeted her with respectful indifference. Her room was modest but clean, overlooking a small rose garden that struggled against the salt air. She unpacked in silence, smoothing the folds from her dresses, arranging her brushes. She lit a candle even before dusk. It steadied her. That evening, while escorting Miss Pembroke on a slow walk along the shaded edge of Ochre Point, Kayla heard the first mention of his name. "Mr. Garrick Thorne returned yesterday," said Miss Pembroke, her voice thin, drifting. "He is recently widowed, quite tragic. Of course the child is with him, James, I believe, such a charming boy. Everyone says he resembles his mother." Kayla's fingers tightened around the handle of the parasol. She said nothing. Her heart made no sound, but her breath caught in her throat like a secret too long buried. 2 days later, he came. The visit was not announced. No card preceded him, no letter, no servant to soften the blow. Kayla was seated in the drawing room, transcribing a letter for Miss Pembroke, when the butler appeared. "A Mr. Thorne, madam. He insists." The name rang through her like the first toll of a funeral bell. She rose. Her hands were steady, but her skin felt too tight for her bones. When she stepped into the corridor, the late afternoon sun angled through the stained glass window, casting crimson and gold patterns across the floor and across Garrick Thorne, standing at the threshold like the ghost of a life she had once lived. He was tall as ever, dressed in a cream linen suit, the crisp edge of his white collar immaculate, his dark blonde hair combed back with military precision. But his face had changed. The jaw was the same, sharp and commanding, but time had drawn something more profound into his gaze, a fatigue no wealth could soften, no tailor could hide. "Kayla," he said, Her name fell from his lips without pretense, but heavy with something perilously close to reverence. She did not curtsy. She did not smile. "Mr. Thorne," she replied, her voice level and dry, "this is not your home." "No," he answered, "but you are here." The silence between them was deep and pulsing. And then, softly, as if the weight of the world hinged on it, he said, "He remembers your lullaby." Her composure flickered, but only for an instant. She turned away. "You brought James here?" "We're staying at Hawthorne House. A short walk." Still facing the window, she asked, "Why are you here, Garrick?" "I need your help," he said simply. A bitter laugh bloomed on her lips, but never escaped. "Do you?" she murmured. "How novel. There is tension among my investors. Rumors. The market is unstable, and Newport's gossip flows faster than telegrams. You understand these people far better than they ever understood you." She faced him again, her eyes sharp now. "You left me," she said, each word carved from ice. "You took our son. You stood before a judge and did not speak my name, and now you come asking for my insight on champagne toasts and ballroom betrayals." "No," he said, and for the first time his voice broke. "I came to ask if you would see him, speak to him. He barely remembers you, and He swallowed. "I cannot fix what I've broken, but perhaps you can remind him of who you are." Her heart thundered. 100 answers formed, none escaped. "You can have time with him," he continued, "if you'll agree to assist me quietly. No one need know you're advising me. I will grant you full access to James during the summer. I swear it." She moved past him then, her skirts brushing the marble floor. At the archway, she turned. "You ask me to barter emotion for strategy," she said, her voice calm but unyielding. "I am not the woman I was 7 years ago, Garrick. I do not accept favors wrapped in conditions." And then she was gone, leaving him alone in the corridor, bathed in the blood-red light of the sun's last descent. Outside, the waves whispered against the cliffs, and the roses bent their heads to the coming night. Kayla sat in her room, candle lit once more, and touched the embroidered handkerchief that bore her son's name. She had refused him, but her hand trembled, and in her eyes the first tears in years did not fall, but burned. The gardens of Hawthorne House were sculpted with the same ruthless precision as its legacy. Every hedge, every stone path, every iron gate was a testament to the Thorne name, unbending, polished, cold. It was here that Kayla stood, gloved hands folded tightly before her, as the governess announced, "He will be down shortly, madam." Madam. The word pierced her with cruel irony. She had not entered the main house, of course. She was received in the southern garden, where children of privilege often took their tea beneath the shade of climbing wisteria. A tray had been set for 2, biscuits arranged like soldiers, tea steeping in porcelain painted with forget-me-nots. A child's setting curated for innocence. Kayla's heart beat so loudly within her chest she feared it might crack the china. Then a sound, light footsteps on the gravel. A pause. She turned. There he was, James, 10 years old, dressed in a navy blue sailor suit with crisp white cuffs and a matching hat clutched in his small hand. His shoes gleamed. His posture was perfect. He had been trained, clearly, taught to behave, to bow, to recite. But the child before her was no recitation. He was her son. For a moment he only stared. Then dutifully he offered a polite nod. "Good afternoon," he said, voice soft and unfamiliar. "Are you the lady I am to have tea with?" Her throat tightened. The instinct to kneel, to reach for him, pulsed through her, but she stood still. "I am," she answered, her voice gentler than it had been in years. "My name is Kayla." He blinked. "That's my middle name." "Yes," she whispered. "It is." They sat. He waited for her to pour the tea, thanked her with precision, took a single biscuit, and placed his napkin carefully in his lap. Every movement, every blink, spoke of coaching, not connection. The boy had been sculpted in her absence. She studied his face as he looked at the violets beyond the hedge. His profile was Garrick's, the arch of his brow, the sharpness of his cheekbone. But when he turned slightly toward her, the faintest indentation appeared in his left cheek, a dimple, her dimple. Her hands curled in her lap to keep from reaching across the table. "You may ask me anything," she said, "or say nothing at all." He tilted his head. "Do I know you?" The words did not hurt. They shattered. "No," she replied, "but you did, when you were very small." He nodded, solemn. "Father said we used to live far away, in a little house." "We did. Why did we leave?" The ache behind her ribs became unbearable. "That's a story your father and I should tell you together. One day." He looked disappointed, but not surprised. Kayla understood in that moment that this child had been raised on partial truths and polished silences. They drank tea in soft tension. He asked if she read books. She said yes. He asked if she had ever ridden a horse. She had. He asked if she had ever met someone famous. "When I was your age, I thought the baker was the most famous man alive," she answered, smiling. That earned a small smile in return. And then a pause. "Do you know a song?" he asked suddenly. "One about the moon?" Her breath caught. "Yes," she said softly. "I do. Did you ever sing it? To a baby?" Her voice failed her for a heartbeat. "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. "I think I remember," he whispered. They did not speak again before the governess returned. James stood, bowed politely, and thanked her for her company. She watched him walk away. His spine was straight, but his shoulders were a little softer than before. The next day, she was summoned to tea, not with Garrick, with Celeste Rathbone. The Rathbone cottage on Bellevue Avenue was anything but modest. Cream-colored columns framed its entrance, and ivy curled with deliberate elegance along every balustrade. Kayla was received on the rear terrace, where Celeste sat surrounded by peonies and parasols, draped in mint silk with gold stitching, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast her in ethereal light. "Oh, you're here," Celeste said, with a smile as delicate as poison. "Do sit. I've been simply dying to become acquainted." Kayla took her seat. A maid offered iced tea and cucumber sandwiches. The sky was mercilessly blue. "I must confess," Celeste continued, "when Garrick told me you were in town, I was intrigued. He so rarely speaks of the past, one forgets he even had a wife." Kayla did not blink. "And yet here I am." Celeste laughed lightly. "Yes, here you are, in such unadorned elegance. I find it suits the moment. Oh, but you must let me lend you a proper hat. You're baking." Kayla smiled thinly. "I've endured worse climates." "Indeed." Celeste sipped her tea, then leaned forward, voice lowered to a honeyed threat. "You see, darling, Garrick is a man of duty. He does what is required. He may feel obligated now, but eventually, obligation gives way to order. And the order of society is unkind to those who don't know when to let go." Kayla met her eyes. "I let go once. It cost me everything. I won't make that mistake again." Celeste's smile wavered for a fraction of a second. Then she waved a hand, dismissing the conversation like a stray breeze. "Well," she chirped, "do enjoy your time here. Do be useful." That evening, Garrick came to Elmshade with a written agreement. She received him in the library, among faded tapestries and dust-veiled busts of Greek philosophers. He was dressed in charcoal grey, no tie, the top button of his waistcoat undone, a gesture that felt intimate, whether intentional or not. "I want to make this official," he said. "I'm requesting your continued help with appearances, meetings, reading the room when I can't, and in return, unrestricted access to James, no supervision." Kayla read the document. Clear, legally sound. An offer built on guilt, perhaps, but not manipulation. "I want a clause," she said. "Of course. I choose the hours. I decide if he may visit me, not only the other way around. And if you make any decision regarding him that affects his safety or education without informing me, This agreement is null. Garrick studied her. Done. He retrieved a pen. She signed first. Then he did. He hesitated before placing the pen down. James asked about you, he said. Today. Kayla said nothing. He said you looked familiar, but not from a dream, from a song. The air shifted between them. He looked at her, and the silence became a current, crackling just beneath the surface. If I could undo it, he said softly, I would. Kayla met his gaze without flinching. But you cannot. And with that, she left him in the library, surrounded by marble men who had also once believed they knew what power was. In her room, she placed the signed document beside the candle. Then, for the first time in years, she allowed herself to hum. Just one line. The one about the moon. The air inside Hawthorne House was always cool, no matter the season. Beneath its stone archways and coffered ceilings, the chill of legacy clung to every corridor, every mirror-framed portrait of Thorne's past. It was a house designed not for comfort, but for permanence, for power, for men like Garrick. Kayla stood alone in the morning room, where the first of their scheduled working meetings was to take place. Through the tall windows, sunlight spilled across the patterned rug, gilding the corners of a settee upholstered in pale damask. A tea tray had been placed near the window, 2 porcelain cups untouched. The maid who delivered it had not met her gaze. She adjusted the cuff of her dove-grey sleeve, smoothing the fabric with practiced grace. Her Gibson tuck was pinned with sharp precision. Every line of her posture was a shield. Today, she would not be the abandoned wife. She would be the mind behind the curtain, the quiet tactician summoned when marble cracked and gold trembled. The door opened. Garrick entered without preamble, dressed in a tailored linen suit of soft charcoal, no cravat, his collar slightly open, a concession to the heat or to her, she could not tell. In one hand, he carried a thin leather portfolio. Good morning, he said with the careful formality of a man navigating a minefield. Mr. Thorne, she answered without a hint of warmth. He placed the folder between them on the side table. I've compiled a list of engagements for the next fortnight. Dinners, teas, lawn matches, most of them are with investors or their wives. I'll need you to observe. Listen. Read the undercurrent. Am I to be introduced? She asked, already knowing the answer. No, he said. You'll attend as Miss Pembroke's companion. No one will question your presence beside her, and those who do won't dare ask. Kayla nodded once, then opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the names with the speed of instinct. Cavendish, Remington, Pembroke, Rathbone. All old money. All watching his empire closely. You're hemorrhaging confidence, she said bluntly. Garrick exhaled. They've begun pulling private holdings from our Latin American funds, quietly but steadily. If it continues, you'll lose the board. He nodded. And the last of the trust the Thorne name commands. Kayla looked up from the folder. Then let us begin. For the next hour, she listened as Garrick detailed the growing instability in the South American bond markets, the whispered fear of a second recession, and the board's increasing demands for more aggressive, if ethically dubious, intervention. Kayla, silent at first, absorbed each word, her mind weaving threads behind her still expression. She did not interrupt. She calculated. I'll attend the Remington luncheon, she said at last. Celeste will be there, and I suspect she's already been briefed on your liquidity issues. If she's speaking of it at tea, it means someone on your board has grown nervous enough to enlist her influence. Garrick gave a humorless smile. You haven't lost your touch. Kayla didn't return it. I never had the luxury of losing it. For several days, they worked in this rhythm. Formal meetings in the early hours, Kayla accompanying Miss Pembroke to carefully selected engagements by midday. Quiet reports delivered to Garrick at dusk. She studied who tilted their wineglass too often, who hesitated before answering questions about fall investments, who spoke Celeste's name with excessive familiarity. She catalogued inflections, glances, moments. And each evening she returned to her borrowed room at Elmshade with the fatigue not of labor, but of performance. Then, late one evening, she arrived at Hawthorne House with an envelope. The butler, wordlessly accustomed to her presence now, allowed her entry. Garrick awaited her in the marble vestibule, beneath the arched ceiling where a chandelier of Venetian glass sparkled above them like a galaxy of shattered stars. His vest was unbuttoned, his expression unreadable. "I believe you should see this," she said, handing him the envelope. He opened it. Inside, a folded page. On it, in Kayla's sharp hand, the names of 3 board members and a note. "All dined at the Pembrokes last Thursday. Each has shifted their secondary holdings out of Thorne bonds this week." Garrick closed the paper, but his hands were trembling. "How long?" she asked. "Since the Panama line collapsed," he answered. "They suspect the ties to us are deeper than we've admitted." "And are they?" A pause. "Yes?" Kayla crossed her arms. Her voice remained cool. "Then you've been lying not only to investors, but to your own son's future." His gaze snapped to hers. "Everything I've done has been to secure his future." "No," she said, her voice quiet but piercing. "Everything you've done has been to secure your name." The words hung between them, echoing against stone. He looked away. "You're right." And then, as if something within him cracked at last, he spoke again, slower, lower. "I didn't just leave for the merger, Kayla." Her breath stopped. "I told myself it was the only way, that the London opportunity required swift departure, that you'd follow later once the scandal faded. But it wasn't just about business. It was about you." She did not move. "My mother," he continued, "filed a petition with a family court behind my back. She gathered testimonies, half-truths, distortions. She claimed your grief made you unstable, that you had violent moods." Her voice, when it came, was hollow. "You mean when I wept in the nursery? When I refused to attend the harvest ball because our child had a fever? When I asked for your time instead of sending notes through the valet?" He flinched. "They labeled you emotionally unfit," he said. "The petition passed in secret. She had influence, judges, friends in the bar association." "And you?" she asked. He looked at her then, not as a tycoon, not as the man who had inherited a legacy, but as something closer to a penitent. "I signed a waiver. I told myself it was temporary, that I could fix it after the merger." Kayla turned away, her hands white against her skirts, her body stiffened, not with rage, but with something deeper, something broken. "You gave them permission to erase me." He took a step toward her, then stopped. "I was a coward." She looked back over her shoulder, eyes brimming but unshed. "No, you were my husband." Silence. Not even the chandelier dared to glitter too brightly. "I don't ask for forgiveness," he said. "Only the chance to do what's right now." She breathed in once, deeply, and then nodded. "For James's sake I will continue, but do not mistake my cooperation for reconciliation." "I won't." She stepped past him, the echo of her footsteps swallowed by the marble beneath. At the door, she paused. "If you ever use my silence against me again," she said, "I will burn what remains of your name, so that James may build something better from its ashes." And then she left him there alone, beneath the glass stars of his grandfather's chandelier. Outside, the fog had rolled in from the sea, wrapping the grounds in ghostly white. And Kayla, though shattered, walked forward, her spine straight, her eyes dry, and her heart not broken, but reforged. The Bellevue cotillion had returned with its usual orchestration of opulence and pretense, filling Newport's most coveted ballroom with the soft rustle of silk, the glint of diamonds, and the low murmur of reputation being bartered behind fans. Lanterns in cut-glass sconces painted the walls in amber light, while the scent of orchids and polished brass clung to the air like perfume too heavily applied. Kayla Hart Thorne stood at the top of the ballroom stairs, her gloved hands clenched delicately around a beaded reticule she had not chosen. The evening gown, a deep garnet silk with modest puffed sleeves and delicate embroidery at the hem, was borrowed from Miss Pembroke, who no longer attended such events, but insisted Kayla go in her place as a kindness to an old name that deserved defending. The dress was exquisite. It fit well enough, though it belonged to a woman whose shoulders carried less burden. A thin velvet ribbon circled Kayla's neck, and her hair had been arranged into a soft chignon, loose tendrils framing her face. She wore no jewels, no family heirlooms, no wedding ring. As she descended the staircase, a few turned to look, not out of admiration, but confusion. There was a trace of familiarity in her features, something they could not quite name, like a memory just beyond reach. A lady of means, perhaps, or someone they had once seen in a portrait before the frame was quietly removed. She moved to the edge of the room, where a column offered partial refuge from the current of Newport's elite. She had come not to be seen, but to see. To observe the Remingtons, the Cavendishes, and the Rathbones, to catch the whispers before they reached the press, and to detect which gloved hands trembled over their punch. Garrick was not yet present. Celeste, however, was. The woman moved through the ballroom with practiced grace, dressed in ivory tulle, embroidered with gold thread and moonstones. A tiara of pearls nestled in her golden hair. She floated from group to group, her laughter soft and effortless, her smile a blade wrapped in lace. Kayla kept her distance until she couldn't. An hour into the evening, as the music shifted into a quadrille and the chandeliers dimmed for effect, Celeste's voice rose just above the hum of conversation near the orchestra. "Oh, but truly, did you not read the letter? It was most tragic. She wrote to him begging for acknowledgement, for affection. It's all quite pathetic, really. I've never seen such theatrical desperation, so unbecoming." The words were baited with false concern, coated in sweet cruelty. The murmurs began. Kayla turned slowly. A small crowd had formed around Celeste, their expressions mixed with curiosity and disdain. A folded sheet of paper passed from hand to hand. Her name, her handwriting, or rather a clever imitation of it. The forged letter portrayed a woman pleading with Garrick to rekindle their love, calling herself forgotten, begging him not to abandon her again. It was precisely the kind of letter a desperate woman might write, and exactly the kind of scandal society devoured like wine-drenched fruit. Kayla's blood turned cold, her skin burned. She took a single step forward. "I would like to see that," she said calmly. Celeste turned, a look of mock surprise painted across her face. "Mrs. Thorne, oh, well, I suppose you would." The letter was handed to her. She read it. Every word twisted, desperate, humiliating. There was no signature, but the implication was as sharp as any blade. She was grasping, shameless, and Garrick, dignified, silent, was too much a gentleman to expose her. She handed the page back without comment. "I see," she said. Celeste tilted her head. "Don't be ashamed, dear. We all cling to what we once had. Some of us just do it more publicly." Kayla opened her mouth, but she never had the chance to speak, because Garrick entered the ballroom, tall, composed, dressed in black evening wear, with a white cravat knotted tight against his throat and a gaze that found Kayla immediately, as if pulled by invisible thread. He crossed the room in a matter of seconds, unbothered by etiquette or interruption. "Give it to me," he said, not to Kayla, but to Celeste. She blinked. "The letter," he said again. "Now." The silence was immediate. Crystal stopped clinking. Conversations froze in place. Celeste faltered. "Garrick, surely we don't need—" "You had it forged. Your seamstress was careless with her ink when copying letters for the society directory last week. I recognized the blot." Her mouth opened, then shut. He held up the page. "This is a lie, a petty one." He turned to the gathering crowd. "My former wife has never once debased herself with pleading. She has never asked me for anything she did not already deserve by right. This letter is an insult not only to her, but to your intelligence." A murmur ran through the room. Celeste paled. Garrick turned to Kayla, and for a moment, in front of the most powerful eyes in Newport, there was no one else. Their gazes locked. Something raw passed between them. Not reconciliation, not yet. but something like recognition, of damage, of dignity. Kayla inclined her head, then stepped back into the crowd. She would not let them see how her knees trembled. Later that night, away from the ballroom, in the quiet halls of Hawthorne House, Kayla found James sitting on the piano bench, his legs swinging slightly, his hands resting on the keys without sound. She paused at the threshold. "Did you enjoy the evening?" she asked softly. He turned. "Father said I couldn't go, but I heard people talking." Her heart clenched. "Do you remember any of it?" He nodded. "They said something about a letter about you." "I see." He looked down. "It wasn't true, was it?" "No, James, it wasn't." He was silent. Then, very softly, "There's a song. I can't remember the words, but I think it was about a ship and the moon." Her breath caught. She moved to the piano, sat beside him, and placed her hand gently over his. "I know that song," she whispered. She played the first chord, then another, and she began to hum, no words, just the melody. James leaned against her, his small head resting against her arm, his fingers finding a single note and pressing it again and again. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, and down the hall, unseen, Garrick stood in the shadows, watching them both. He did not speak, he did not move, but something inside him, a wall, a weight, a silence, finally began to break. The first whisper came during a quiet garden luncheon at the home of Mrs. Letty Vanderbilt, a widow with failing eyesight but an acute sense for tone. She leaned in toward Kayla with the fragility of an aging swan and said, without preface, "They sold me something I cannot read, dear, but I signed it all the same. They said it would secure my grandchildren's future. I didn't want to seem foolish, so I said yes." Kayla smiled politely, but the chill in her chest had nothing to do with the iced tea between them. Later that evening, by the glow of the reading lamp in her borrowed room at Elmshade, Kayla examined a copy of the investment leaflet passed discreetly into her gloved hand by Mrs. Vanderbilt's housemaid. The language was artfully vague, cloaked in a veil of institutional credibility, but Kayla had seen this before, years ago, when Garrick first began building his South American trust portfolios. She had read the small print. She remembered the warnings that had been dismissed in board meetings, brushed off as legal excess. Now, the bonds were being packaged into discreet consols and sold to women with pensions and shallow inheritances. Widows, spinsters, governesses, women who would be blamed for their own ruin if the scheme failed, because no one ever took the time to explain things to them in words they understood. Kayla stood slowly from her chair, her body trembling not with shock, but fury. She requested a meeting with Garrick the following morning. He agreed, but when she arrived at Hawthorne House, she was informed he had been summoned to New York unexpectedly and would return by nightfall. She waited, pacing the marble floors, her gloves in her hand, the document tucked inside her reticule like a weapon. Instead, Celeste arrived. She came unannounced, floating into the house with the practiced charm of someone who never had to wait for a door to open. Her dress was a soft sky blue, trimmed in white lace, her hair swept into a meticulous coil pinned with sapphire combs. She looked radiant, calculated, dangerous. "Oh, Kayla," she said breezily, "how fortuitous. I was hoping we could speak privately." Kayla said nothing. Celeste's eyes sparkled. "You've always been clever, observant. I admire that about you, and I imagine you've seen things you shouldn't have." "I've seen enough," Kayla replied. Celeste tilted her head. "And yet you remain silent, noble but impractical." She reached into her reticule and withdrew a velvet pouch. She set it gently on the table between them. The sound it made was soft, but unmistakably heavy. Kayla did not touch it. Celeste smiled. "A gesture of goodwill. Call it an acknowledgement of your discretion." Kayla's voice, when it came, was quiet, but it cut like winter wind. "If you ever offer me money again, Miss Rathbone, I will bring this to the press myself." Celeste blinked. "I will name names," Kayla continued. I will stand on the steps of the exchange if I must, and read aloud every ledger I have memorized. Do not mistake my silence for ignorance, or my restraint for fear." A beat passed. Then Celeste, expressionless now, gathered the pouch and returned it to her reticule. "You've always been difficult," she murmured. "I've always been honest," Kayla replied. Celeste turned on her heel and left. Kayla's hands trembled long after the door closed. By the time Garrick returned that evening, the wind had shifted over Newport. Rumors of restlessness among shareholders reached him before he crossed the marble threshold. He found Kayla waiting in his study, standing near the hearth, though no fire was lit. "I know what you've allowed," she said before he could speak. "The bond manipulation, the widows, the lies." He closed the door. "You said you wanted to rebuild your legacy. Is this the foundation you plan to use?" Garrick looked tired. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. The board made the decision to consolidate the accounts while I was in Washington. No, she interrupted. "You delegated the power, and now you must own the result." He nodded slowly. "You're right. Then end it," she said. "Dismantle the fund, refund what you can. If you don't, I will." He looked at her, truly looked, and saw the woman he had once left behind had become something steel-boned and luminous. Not angry, not hysterical, resolute. "I'll handle it," he said softly. "No more deceptions." Before she could respond, the door burst open. It was the governess. "Mr. Thorne, James is ill. Fever. He collapsed during the yacht outing." Kayla's heart stopped. "Where is he?" she asked. "He's upstairs. Doctor has been summoned." She ran past Garrick without waiting for permission. Up the grand staircase, down the corridor of family portraits, into the nursery where the light had been dimmed and the air smelled faintly of camphor and clean linen. James lay in the bed, pale and sweating. His hair clung to his forehead and his breath came in short, shallow gasps. Kayla moved to his side, knelt beside the bed, and reached for his hand. The maid tried to stop her. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thorne, but Miss Eugenia said—" Kayla looked up with eyes that froze the air. "Leave us." The maid hesitated, then backed away. James stirred. "Mother," he whispered. She pressed her lips to his knuckles. "I'm here." His fingers curled around hers like a lifeline. The physician arrived minutes later and declared it a combination of sunstroke and anxiety. "He's strong," the man said. "He'll recover, but he needs quiet, familiarity." Kayla stayed by the bed long after the others departed, until the door opened again. Eugenia Thorne stood there, back straight, draped in morning lavender, her silver hair wrapped like a crown. "What gives you the right to be here?" she asked coldly. Kayla did not rise. "I am his mother. You are nothing in this house, nothing in name, nothing in title. You lost that privilege years ago." "I didn't lose it," Kayla said. "You took it. You buried it in court documents and whispered lies." Eugenia stepped into the room, eyes blazing. "I will have you removed, legally, publicly. I will ruin what little respect remains for you in this town." Kayla rose slowly so as not to wake the boy. "You can try," she said quietly, "but I'm not the girl you once silenced, and the world is not as blind as you believe." Eugenia faltered. For the first time, she looked uncertain. "You've always been so good at control," Kayla continued. "But now your own grandson calls for me in his sleep." Eugenia's eyes darkened. "This will not end in your favor," she warned. Kayla turned her gaze to James, who had shifted in his sleep and now clung to her scarf as if it were armor. "It already has," she whispered. That night, Kayla did not return to Elmshade. She sat beside the boy until dawn, holding his hand while the fever broke, her dress wrinkled, her hair loosened, her soul unbending. And when Garrick returned at sunrise, he found them just as he had left them, the mother he had failed and the child he had stolen, now woven back together by something older and fiercer than law, love that refused to die. The rain came without warning, slashing against the panes of Elmshade, as if the sky itself had turned bitter. Wind screamed through the trees lining Bellevue Avenue, bending even the proud oaks toward the ground. In the drawing room, the fire crackled low, and Kayla sat alone, the society column trembling slightly in her hands. It had been printed on the second page of the Newport Gazette, nestled between news of summer soirees and marriage announcements. But the headline was sharp and cruel: "The Thorne widow who refuses to let go." Beneath it, a paragraph crafted with icy elegance detailed Kayla's presence at every gathering Garrick attended, described her as a figure clinging to a name that no longer belonged to her, and suggested, with just enough venom, that she had returned to Newport not for her son, but to reclaim a fortune she lost when her husband outgrew her. Her hands curled at the edges of the paper. She stood slowly, intending to burn it in the hearth, when a sudden knock rattled the door. It flew open before she reached it. The governess, breathless, hair disheveled, stood in the doorway, water dripping from her shawl. "He's gone," she gasped. "James is gone. He ran off. He read it, the article." Kayla felt the world tilt. "Where?" she asked, already reaching for her cloak. "We don't know. He said he was going to fix it. He left a note." Child's writing was jagged, hurried, barely legible. "They're lying about her. I'm going to make them stop." The cliffs. It struck Kayla with terrifying certainty. Not the town, not the press office. The cliffs where Garrick once walked James after difficult lessons, where the boy believed secrets could be shouted into the wind and never heard again. She didn't wait for a carriage. She ran. Her boots slipped on the wet stone path, her cloak whipped behind her like a broken sail, and her breath came in short, desperate bursts. She reached Hawthorne House just as Garrick was mounting his horse. "He's at the cliffs," she shouted, her voice rising above the wind. "The western edge, where the sea breaks the rock." Garrick didn't hesitate. He reached down and pulled her up behind him. They rode without words, the horses' hooves pounding the mud, the storm lashing against them in sheets. When they dismounted at the end of the trail, the sky was nearly black. "James!" Kayla cried, her voice swallowed by the wind. "James!" Lightning cracked, illuminating the rocky ledge ahead, and a small figure standing too close to the edge. He turned at their voices. His face was streaked with rain and tears. "I wanted to make them stop saying those things," he shouted. "I was going to yell it into the ocean. I thought maybe it would listen." Kayla's heart shattered. "You can't stop lies with more noise, sweetheart," she called, stepping toward him slowly. "You can only undo them with truth. And you are my truth." James took a step back, then slipped. His foot caught on a loose stone, and his body tipped sideways. Kayla screamed, but Garrick moved faster than thought. He lunged forward, grabbing James by the arm and yanking him back towards safety, but in doing so, he lost his own footing. The ground beneath him gave way, and Garrick slid toward the edge, hands scrabbling against the slick rock. His leg caught on a root, stopping his fall, but he dangled halfway over the abyss, rain pouring down his face, mud clinging to his hands. "Hold on!" Kayla shouted, grabbing James and pulling him behind her. She scanned the area. No rope, no branches strong enough to hold. And then she remembered. The sailor's knot. A trick she had learned as a girl from the old steward who served her mother's estate. He taught her how to tie a secure rescue loop with only a sash and instinct. She pulled the waist sash from her cloak, tied it swiftly into a double loop, knotted it at her chest and crawled toward Garrick. "Don't you dare let go," she said through clenched teeth. Their eyes met. Rain blurred everything but the truth in his expression. Raw fear, not for himself, but for her. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For everything. For the court. For leaving. For letting them ruin your name." She didn't answer. She wrapped the loop around his chest, secured it under his arms, and braced herself against a rock. "On 3, she said. 1, 2. He pushed upward. She pulled with everything she had. With a grunt, he rolled onto solid ground, coughing, breath ragged. They lay side by side on the wet earth, mud smeared across their skin, the storm still raging overhead. James ran to them, sobbing. Kayla pulled him into her arms, trembling with relief. For several moments they remained there, the three of them clinging to each other as though the sea might come back to claim what it had nearly taken. Eventually, Garrick sat up. "You could have let me fall." Kayla looked at him, eyes unreadable. "But I didn't." He exhaled, slow and unsteady. "I watched you walk into court alone," he said, voice barely audible above the rain. "I let them call you unfit, unstable. I knew it was false. I told myself it was temporary, that I would fix it, but I didn't. I buried it because it was easier." She turned her gaze toward the cliffs, where the ocean foamed below like a mouth of teeth. "You let them unmake me," she said. He nodded. "I have lived with the shame of it every day." Her eyes met his again. There was no softness in them, but there was a sliver of something else, belief perhaps. Not in his words, but in the weight behind them. They stood together, soaked, silent. James held both their hands now, small fingers wrapped around one of each. Kayla looked down at her son, then back at Garrick. "You have a long road to walk," she said quietly. "I know, and I may never walk beside you on it." "I'll walk it anyway," he replied. She nodded once. "Then start with him," she said, gesturing to James. "Start with the boy who just risked everything to defend his mother's name." Garrick knelt beside their son, brushed the wet hair from his forehead. "I'm sorry," he said, voice breaking. "You should never have read those lies, and I should never have let the world believe them." James nodded, blinking away tears. "I just wanted to protect her." Kayla's hand reached for his, squeezing gently. "You did, my love. You did." The rain began to slow, softening to a drizzle. A gull cried overhead, and the sea retreated slightly, its fury spent for now. Together, the three of them walked back down the muddy path, shoes ruined, bodies trembling, hearts exposed to the raw wind. They did not speak again on the journey home. But in the silence, something essential had shifted. Something fragile and fierce, like glass catching light, and though forgiveness had not yet come, the door to it had opened. The invitation arrived on ivory paper, heavy with gold embossing, folded once, as if to suggest discretion was elegance rather than artifice. It was addressed not to Kayla, nor to Garrick, but to a select list of men whose influence held Newport's fragile reputation together, like silk thread stitched through old linen. The handwriting was unmistakable. Eugenia Thorne. The supper would be held at the conservatory of Hawthorne House, a rarely open space of marble fountains and caged orchids, where secrets could be spoken beneath the rustle of palm fronds and the pretense of botanical serenity. Only those who mattered were to attend: judges, bankers, legal counsellors, and the highest-ranking trustees of the Thorne estate. It was not a gathering for celebration. It was a negotiation for erasure. Eugenia sat at the head of the long mahogany table, draped in lavender silk trimmed with black jet beads, her silver hair pinned in a style so tight it seemed to draw the lines deeper into her pale face. Her voice was calm, deliberate, as she outlined her proposition. Garrick, seated 2 chairs down, listened in silence, his expression unreadable. Candles flickered against crystal glassware, and the air smelled of roasted lamb and cold calculation. "The time has come," Eugenia said, folding her gloved hands. "We must preserve what remains of the family's name. The boy will remain in Garrick's custody, full and formal. In exchange, Mrs. Thorne will be granted a discreet annuity, a property far from society's eye, and the dignity of silence. Her reputation will be smoothed, her future comfortable." A few of the older men nodded, as if this were a mercy. "She will no longer attend social functions," Eugenia continued. "No contact with investors, no mention in the papers. Her presence will fade, like a dream best not remembered." Garrick's knuckles whitened against the stem of his glass. "And if she refuses?" asked Judge Harlan from the end of the table, voice low. Eugenia's eyes gleamed. "Then we proceed through the courts. I have letters, testimonies, documents from the past that still carry legal weight." The silence that followed was deep and cool as the marble beneath their feet. And then, A sound. The soft, deliberate click of a door opening. All eyes turned. Kayla entered. Not rushed. Not flustered. She moved with the ease of someone who had nothing to prove, but everything to protect. She wore a high-collared walking dress of deep midnight blue, unadorned save for the single pearl pinned at her throat. Her gloves were still in her hand, and her hair was pulled back in a simple knot that revealed the strength of her jaw and the clarity in her eyes. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. Eugenia rose slowly from her seat. "You are not welcome here." Kayla met her gaze. "And yet, I'm here." Judge Harlan cleared his throat. "Mrs. Thorne, Miss Hart," she corrected. "My name was taken from me by those seated at this table. I do not use what I did not consent to relinquish." A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Kayla stepped closer to the table, unfolding a sheet of parchment from her reticule. "I bring this not as a threat," she said, "but as a truth you have chosen not to see." She laid it flat on the table, columns, figures, signatures. "The foreign bond manipulation," she said, "endorsed by no fewer than 3 men in this room, sold under the Thorne name, sold to widows, to governesses, to women who believed your word meant protection." She looked directly at Eugenia. "This is the legacy you seek to preserve." Eugenia's eyes narrowed. "You dare—" "I dare," Kayla said, her voice rising only slightly, "because I have already lost everything your name could take from me. I have nothing left to fear, but I have something left to defend." She turned to Garrick, who had not taken his eyes off her. "I do not want your title. I do not want your money. I want my place in my son's life, and I will not barter for it. Not with your mother, not with your legacy, not with anything but the truth." A hush settled over the room like a dropped curtain. Garrick stood slowly. "My mother's proposal," he said, "does not have my support, nor my signature, nor my respect." Eugenia flinched. "I will not silence Kayla," he continued. "I will not allow her to be exiled under the guise of protection. If anything in this house still bears my name, let it be known that I stand beside her." Gasps. Celeste, seated near the back in a dress too pale for the hour, rose abruptly and left without a word. Judge Harlan looked between them, then back to the document on the table. "This changes things," he murmured. Kayla did not smile. She did not thank anyone. She simply turned and walked out, her spine straight, her heels echoing like verdicts against the marble. Garrick followed moments later. The supper dissolved. Eugenia remained seated, motionless, as the candles burned lower. Later that night, alone in the hallway outside James's nursery, she watched from the shadows as Kayla knelt beside the boy's bed, tucking the blanket beneath his chin. He stirred slightly, smiling in sleep. Kayla bent and pressed a kiss to his forehead. She stood, turning toward the door, and paused. Eugenia remained silent, unseen, but her eyes were glassed with something she did not recognize. It was not grief. It was not rage. It was the quiet ache of a woman watching a legacy slip from her fingers, not through failure, but through the revelation that perhaps it had never truly been hers. And in that moment, though she would never admit it aloud, Eugenia Thorne began to question whether silence had ever protected anything at all. Newport was quiet in the aftermath of summer's peak, as if the season itself had paused to observe the shifting fortunes of the Thorne family. The grand houses stood in golden light, their windows shuttered just enough to filter the truth. Servants moved cautiously. Conversations were laced with a new tension, not scandal, but uncertainty. The Thorne name no longer gleamed untarnished. Inside the panelled offices of the Rhode Island Trust and Trade, Garrick sat behind a wide walnut desk, sleeves rolled above his wrists, collar open, his waistcoat draped over the back of a nearby chair. His ink-stained fingers moved steadily through ledgers, line by line, initialing corrections, crossing out inflated promises, dismantling the very mechanisms that had once secured his wealth and reputation. Across from him, Two of his longest-serving board members sat in pale discomfort. One cleared his throat. "You're selling the Beacon Street house?" the older man asked. "Yes," Garrick answered without lifting his head. "And the yacht. And the South American interest packages will be disbanded and liquidated by week's end. That's madness. That house belonged to your father. And my father is dead. His name won't shield us now. You'll ruin the firm's appearance of strength. I'd rather ruin the illusion than protect a lie." Silence followed. Garrick didn't fill it. He was past convincing them. Now he acted. By week's end, notices were sent, papers filed, and quiet restitution offered to investors, particularly those previously ignored. Widows received envelopes with apologies and revised bonds. School teachers, seamstresses, and governesses once deemed inconsequential were called by name in formal letters. The estate shrank, but its integrity grew, and Celeste Rathbone retaliated. A week after the restructuring began, the Newport Herald ran a piece in its Sunday supplement, quoting anonymous sources and internal memos leaked directly from the firm's upper floors. The article painted Garrick as unstable, accused him of dissolving sound funds out of romantic guilt, and warned of a coming collapse. And it named Kayla Hart Thorne, a once sheltered social wife now operating as an unchecked advisor with no license or board approval. It was venom served with sugar, wrapped in just enough truth to stick. That morning, Kayla received 7 letters, 3 polite disinvitations, 2 cancelled appointments, and 1 unsigned note that read only, "Clever women don't survive here." She burned none of them. Instead, she dressed in a tailored grey walking suit, added a pair of jet earrings Miss Pembroke insisted she borrow, and made her way to the garden breakfast at the Lambourne estate, where most of Newport's most indiscreet tongues gathered over tea and honeyed melon. She did not sit. She did not smile. She stood in the centre of the lawn, surrounded by pergolas and white iron chairs, and said calmly, "The article was seeded by someone no longer associated with the Thorne estate. All claims are either outdated or based on private correspondences taken without consent. I suggest that if you repeat the lies, you be prepared to provide your source in court." Murmurs rippled through the garden. A few heads turned, but no one replied. Kayla nodded. "Then enjoy your tea." She left without further word, her silence sharper than outrage. The next day, the Herald ran a quiet retraction on page 6. It was not apology, but it was a shift. And the moment of reckoning came days later on the lawn outside St. Margaret's Chapel, where Garrick had just left a charity auction. Reporters lingered nearby, hungry for the next tremor. Celeste arrived uninvited, dressed in blush silk, her hair gleaming in the sun. She approached James, who stood near a lemonade stand, turning a silver coin in his hands. "Well, there you are," she said, her voice syrupy. "I was hoping we could speak." James hesitated. "About what?" "Oh, just us. I thought perhaps I could help explain what's being said about your family. It's all very confusing, isn't it?" He tilted his head. "I don't need help." She reached for his arm gently. "You know I've always looked out for you." James froze. And then, with quiet but firm panic, he pulled back. "I don't want you near me," he said. "You lied about my mother." Reporters turned at once. Celeste blinked, still smiling. "James." But he had already turned and run, straight across the lawn, into Kayla's arms. She caught him, held him, one hand over the back of his head, the other wrapped protectively around his shoulders. "I'm here," she whispered. The flashes of camera shutters popped like fireworks. The moment was captured again and again, a mother and son, locked in defiance, framed by truth. Garrick arrived just as the last photo was taken. He saw the crowd. He saw Celeste, pale and alone. And he saw Kayla, bent over their child, radiating the strength of every storm she had endured. That evening, he stood in the lantern-lit parlour of Elmshade, a folded deed in his hand. "This," he said, placing it gently on the side table, "is for you, the house in the West End. Not a gift, A foundation. Kayla looked at the deed, then at him. There's more, he added. I've rewritten the custody arrangement. Equal authority. Shared guardianship. If anything happens to me, James is yours, fully, without contest. She was silent. He stepped closer, but not too close. I don't want your forgiveness tonight. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm asking you to build something beside me, not as my shadow, as my partner, with your name, your work, your voice. Kayla studied him, the way his jaw clenched when he waited, the tremble he tried to hide behind stillness. Then she said carefully, I will not be bought with homes or papers. I know. I will not live behind you. I will not be spoken over or quieted when it suits your comfort. I wouldn't dare. I will not raise our son to believe that a man's remorse is enough. He must earn respect. Garrick nodded. And I will not accept any future with you unless I can enter it with my full self intact. Not a wife you pity, a woman you trust. He lowered his gaze, then lifted it again. You already are. She walked to the window. Rain had begun to fall, soft and slow against the glass. The world smelled like turning earth, like beginnings. You may leave the deed, she said, and though her tone was calm, there was something new in her eyes. Not surrender, permission. When he left, she picked up the paper. Her fingers traced the edge of the seal. Then she folded it, placed it in her desk drawer and sat by the fire, one hand resting on her lap, the other near the embroidery hoop she had left unfinished. Outside, the wind moved the trees like dancers, and inside, Kayla smiled. Not for Garrick, for herself, because for the first time in a decade she held the pen. The wind over Manhattan had a sharpened edge that November. It whistled between gas lamps and cast-iron columns, tugging at hems and lapels, rustling skirts like the pages of forgotten ledgers. And yet, within the modest corner office on Franklin Street, warmth reigned, not from any coal stove or velvet drapery, but from Kayla Hart Thorne herself. Her name, discreetly stenciled in gold leaf on the transom window, read simply, K. H. Thorne, estate consultation, no fanfare, no lineage, no borrowed name. Inside, the space was as carefully curated as the life she had rebuilt. Mahogany shelves held legal manuals, pamphlets on banking reform, a slender volume of Greek tragedies. The desk was wide but worn, bearing ink stains and a chipped corner. A vase of autumn dahlias stood beside a brass blotter. Nothing expensive, but everything chosen. She sat across from a young widow named Mrs. Bennet, who clutched a torn envelope with trembling fingers. They say I should reinvest in copper, the woman whispered. But I don't understand a word of the paperwork. I sew gloves, Mrs. Thorne. I don't read prospectuses. Kayla folded her hands. You don't need to be a banker. You need someone who listens. She reviewed the document slowly, pausing only to explain a clause, soften a technical phrase. The widow's shoulders lowered with every sentence, like a storm dissolving. When their meeting ended, Mrs. Bennet gripped Kayla's hand. I've never felt this seen, she murmured. Thank you. Kayla smiled and walked her to the door, where she paused to glance out onto the grey-brushed city. Rain threatened. The cobblestones gleamed like polished coin. That evening, as the gaslights flared to life and hansom cabs rattled past, Kayla returned to her desk and reached for her journal. She opened to a fresh page. At the top, in her measured script, she wrote, Names of women who must not be forgotten. She underlined it once, and then added Mrs. Bennet, gloves and grit. She was still writing when the doorbell chimed. She rose instinctively, smoothing her sleeves, and opened the door to find a figure she had not expected. Eugenia Thorne, dressed in storm-colored velvet, her hands bare despite the chill. No introduction, no preamble. Eugenia entered as if the space were familiar, though her eyes betrayed surprise at the room's simplicity. She studied the surroundings, noting the modest chair, the stack of letters, the absence of servants or ornaments. Efficient, she remarked, almost austere. It serves its purpose, Kayla replied. Eugenia turned, her face unreadable. She did not sit. I came because I wanted to see for myself what you've done. They speak of you now, you know. Not loudly, but not with mockery either. Kayla waited. I find, Eugenia continued, that I have no criticism to offer. Kayla nodded once. Then perhaps you came to offer something else. A long silence stretched between them. At last, Eugenia said, only this, when I was your age I had power, but no peace. You are choosing the opposite. Kayla's gaze didn't waver. I'm choosing what my son can respect. Eugenia gave a small nod, barely perceptible, then turned to leave. At the threshold she paused. I suppose I should wish you well. Kayla said nothing. She didn't need to. The door closed with a whisper. Days passed, each filled with meetings, consultations, and the growing weight of a name, her own name, whispered in parlours and sewing shops, behind theatre curtains and millinery counters. Mrs. Thorne helps women, not the wives of barons, the rest of us. It was enough. And then, one crisp afternoon in December, Garrick appeared at her door. He did not bring flowers or jewellery, only a leather-bound folder and the scent of winter wind in his coat. I've redone the transparency reports, he said, placing the folder on her desk. I'd like your opinion. Kayla blinked. I've already filed them, if that matters. This, he gestured to the folder, this is for you. Not for approval, for trust. She opened the pages slowly. Numbers danced beside notations, each transaction traceable, each risk declared. She saw no manipulation, no masking, only light. She met his eyes. You're learning. I'm trying, he said. I'd rather fail trying with you than succeed alone. She closed the folder. Then keep trying. A pause. Then, I intend to, he said softly. That week, as Christmas neared and the air turned sweet with pine and clove, James came to visit the office. He arrived with his school books and a paper bag filled with roasted chestnuts, which he insisted they share over her small gas stove. He wandered the space, touching everything, asking questions. Do the women you help all wear black? He asked, gesturing toward the hat rack. Some do. Some wear green or red. Some wear no color at all. And they trust you? I hope they do. James nodded, then reached into his satchel and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. I made this. She unfolded it carefully. It was a child's drawing, a bench in a garden, surrounded by trees and little birds. On the bench sat three figures, a boy with glasses, a woman with a book in her lap, and a man reading over her shoulder. I didn't draw a throne, James explained, because I don't want to be a king. I just want us to sit together, like this. Kayla pressed the paper to her chest for a moment, then traced his face with her hand. I would like that very much. Later that day, as the sky dimmed and snow whispered against the glass, James looked up from his homework and asked, Can I stay here tonight? She turned from the window. You mean, stay the night? He nodded. I want to wake up where you are. Her throat tightened, but she masked it with a smile. Then we shall prepare the sofa with extra pillows and hot cocoa. He grinned. And when he fell asleep, curled beneath a woolen throw, Kayla sat beside him, brushing his hair back with quiet reverence. Outside, the city glittered in frost. Inside, the fire crackled softly, and in the drawer beside her desk, beneath documents and accounts and letters of introduction, lay James's drawing, the bench, the garden, the beginning, her name on the door, her son beneath her roof, her past behind her, her future waiting, not as someone's wife, but as herself. Snow had fallen quietly overnight, cloaking Manhattan in a hush that softened even the most relentless corners of the city. Carriages moved slower on the icy streets. Chimneys exhaled gentle plumes into the white-tinged morning, and in a quiet office on Franklin Street, Kayla Hart Thorne sat with her back to the window, her eyes on a legal parchment that bore her signature, and one more, Garrick Thorne. The joint custody agreement lay between them on the table, a document of rights and shared responsibilities. But more than that, a map of a new future written not in promises, but in terms. Equal, civil, undeniable. Garrick leaned back slightly, studying her face with a reverence that had nothing of the banker's calculation. "You didn't hesitate," he murmured. "I told you once," she replied. "I'd only stand beside you, never behind." He inclined his head as if bowing to a queen. But this time she did not flinch. She had earned the tilt of that crown herself. That evening, a supper was held at the modest hall adjoining the bank, a gathering of widows and pensioned clerks, of secretaries and laundresses who had seen their lives recalibrate thanks to revised investments and honest disclosures. Garrick had invited them not out of obligation, but recognition. And it was Kayla, not he, who sat at the center of the long table, flanked by women who toasted with cider and clutched each other's hands in silent gratitude. Eugenia Thorne arrived near the end. She wore deepest navy, her gloves of the finest kid leather, and a brooch of seed pearls that once adorned her mother's mourning veil. No attendant followed. She entered alone. The room quieted, unsure how to receive the former queen of cold season balls. Kayla stood, steady and unyielding. To the astonishment of all, Eugenia crossed the room and took Kayla's hand, her gloved hand, elegant and deliberate. "My dear," she said softly, the words barely audible over the silence, "we must not let pride outlive love." Then she sat among the widows, accepted a glass of cider and listened. The moment was brief, but in Kayla's heart it unfolded like pages unstuck from years of damp memory. Afterward, as the guests departed in pairs and trios, as laughter lingered in the rafters and oil lamps were dimmed one by one, Garrick approached Kayla in the doorway. He held out no bouquet, no velvet box, no engraved gold, only a single unadorned iron key, heavy and cool to the touch. "It's not an estate," he said, "no chandeliers or butlers, just a stone house at the edge of Ochre Point. 3 rooms, a garden, south-facing windows. It's quiet." She looked down at the key, then up at the man she had once married out of defiance and lost to ambition. "And who owns it?" she asked. "We do," he said, "but it's yours first. I will not move one book or hang one coat unless you ask me to." She closed her fingers around the key. "No ring?" she teased lightly, though her voice held the tremor of memory. "No ring," he replied. "Not until you ask for one. Not until you know I'm not asking for a second chance at marriage." "I'm asking for a second chance at you." She said nothing, but she didn't return the key. 3 days later, Kayla stood at the threshold of the modest house nestled behind a row of sleeping hydrangeas. The snow here was deeper, undisturbed by carts or boots. Smoke curled from the chimney. A single lamp glowed in the window. She turned the key in the door. Inside, the house smelled of beeswax and fresh wood. Curtains in soft linen filtered winter light. The parlour held a piano that had once belonged to Garrick's grandmother. On a table near the hearth, a small vase of snowdrops leaned gently toward the fire. And from the study, a boy's laughter rang out. Kayla followed the sound, heart quickening. She found James seated on a wool rug, his schoolbooks scattered, his hands sticky with ink and peppermint crumbs. He looked up and grinned. "I made cocoa, burned the first pot." She smiled and crouched beside him. "Then you're learning." From the doorframe, Garrick watched. His coat was off. His collar was undone. He held a folded newspaper he hadn't read, and bore an expression that was neither triumphant nor desperate, only grateful. Later, as twilight curled against the window panes and the fireplace whispered in golden breath, Kayla stepped onto the veranda. The garden beyond lay dormant under the snow, but the trellis was still standing, and the bench beneath the arbor remained dry, a light dusting of frost on its slats. She sat, her fingers clasped in her lap. Garrick joined her moments later, wrapping a shawl over both their shoulders like a treaty. She began to hum. That lullaby, the same one James had asked for. But this time, as her voice threaded into the night, Garrick did not sit in silence. He joined her softly at first, uncertain of pitch or lyric, but sure of purpose. They sang together, their breath rising in clouds, two voices woven through melody and memory. No vows were spoken, no promises made, only a song. The city continued beyond them, its clocks ticking, its debts collecting, its carriages rolling toward futures neither could predict. But in that moment, beneath that roof, on that bench of second chances, Kayla knew this was no longer a story of survival. It was a story of return, of choosing love not as surrender, but as resistance, of rewriting endings that once seemed carved in stone. And as Garrick's voice met hers in the harmony she never thought she'd hear again, she allowed herself, at last, to rest her head on his shoulder, not because he asked, but because she wanted to. The year was 1901, and the city had changed. New York had risen higher, noisier, bolder, its skyline pierced now with steel ambition and its streets crisscrossed by electric rails. Where once carriages clattered, now motor cars growled like mechanical beasts. But just beyond the reach of Manhattan's frantic breath, on a bluff overlooking the water near Oka Point, a stone house remained. Its garden, once raw and sparse, now overflowed with climbing roses and herbs that danced in the breeze. The trellis still stood. The bench beneath it had been repainted twice, and the veranda had worn soft with use, its boards smoothed by bare feet, toy wheels, and the quiet pacing of a woman who now carried peace in her every gesture. Inside, the walls held more than warmth. They held stories. There was a portrait in the parlor, not of grandeur or oil, but a simple watercolor painted by James, now 13, taller than his father's shoulder, voice changing like the season. The painting showed a garden bench, the same one outside, with 3 figures. One bore a violin, another a ledger book, and the third, smaller still, with a curl of red hair tied in a ribbon, held a tulip in each hand. Her name was Rose Eugenia Thorne. Born during the first spring the garden ever bloomed in full. She was the child Kayla never expected, the daughter Garrick once feared he would never be worthy of. Her laughter echoed through the house now, soft and high and unburdened. And every time she placed her tiny palm in James's hand or climbed into Garrick's lap with a book too heavy for her, Kayla's throat tightened, not with pain, but with the fragile joy that only comes when sorrow has been known too well. Garrick still rose early each morning, though not to the office tower that now bore his name. He had left the bank in the hands of a new board, women and men trained by Kayla herself. Now he taught mathematics twice a week at a school for girls, and spent his afternoons tending the garden or restoring the old upright piano, though no one could tell if it was more for Rose or for himself. As for Kayla, she remained the quiet force behind a growing network of women's financial aid societies. What had begun as a discreet office on Franklin Street had become 3 branches, Brooklyn, Boston, and one just opened in Philadelphia. She still met each new client herself, still signed her name on every document, Kayla Hart Thorne. That name had once been her sentence. Now it was her signature of survival. They had never remarried, not formally, but on their 10th spring together, 3 years after Garrick had handed her the key to the stone house, Kayla had found a ring tucked between the pages of her journal. Not in a box, not on bended knee, just waiting, quiet, patient. She wore it on her right hand, because the left was always holding something else, a child, a pen, a glove, his hand. James, bright and thoughtful, had chosen to stay half the year at a preparatory academy, and the other half at home. He often read aloud to Rose in the evenings, pausing every so often to explain a word or invent one of his own. He never spoke of Celeste. He no longer needed to. The pain had thinned like sea glass worn smooth by time. Celeste herself had never returned from France. Her name surfaced once more in the society pages, a marriage to a minor count, followed by divorce, then nothing. But no one in the Thorne house spoke ill of her. There was no space left for that kind of noise. And Eugenia. She had grown old, but never small. She lived alone in a narrow townhouse now, her jewels locked in velvet cases, her evenings spent reading poetry she once dismissed as frivolous. She never asked forgiveness. But every second Sunday, she arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, gloves immaculate, eyes clear. Rose called her grandmama. James poured her tea, and Kayla offered her a seat without fanfare. Once, as they walked her to the carriage, Eugenia had murmured, "Legacy is not what you leave behind, it's what refuses to leave you." And Garrick, standing beside her, had replied simply, "Then let ours be kindness." The seasons turned. The world spun forward. And yet, some evenings, when the children were asleep and the lamps dimmed low, Kayla and Garrick returned to the veranda, wrapped in shawls, their fingers entwined. She would hum the lullaby, and he would still find the harmony, though a little lower now, a little softer, not for the neighbors, not for their past, but for themselves, because love had come not in thunder or triumph, not in grand redemption or gilded apology. It had come in survival, in holding on, in returning to a house once empty and making it full. And though no novels would be written about them and no statue carved, their love remained, quiet, enduring, etched not in marble, but in the heartwood of a bench beneath a blooming trellis. And that was enough. Some stories arrive softly, like a letter without return address, like the hush of a lullaby remembered from long ago. Kayla and Garrick's journey was not about perfect endings or fairy tale certainties, but about the courage to rebuild, the grace to forgive, and the quiet strength of choosing love not once, but again and again. What this story teaches us is simple, but not easy. Sometimes healing doesn't come in a thunderclap. It comes in ordinary rooms, in names reclaimed, in glances that say what words cannot, in hands held after years apart. If you made it all the way to the end of this journey, we'd love to know you were here. Leave the word resilience in the comments. Let it be our secret word, yours and ours, for a love that weathered every storm. If this story moved you, consider sending a super thanks on YouTube. Any amount, large or small, helps support the voices behind these stories. The long hours of research, writing, narration, editing, and music. You keep this dream alive. And if now's not the time, we understand. One of the most powerful ways you can help is by sharing this story with a friend, a sister, a mother, someone who believes in second chances. I'm also leaving more stories like this one in the cards above. Each one holds a different kind of truth, a different kind of hope. Maybe one will feel like it was written just for you. Thank you for listening with your heart. Until our next tale, keep believing in love, the kind that endures, the kind that returns, the kind that begins again.